What happens when a woman who has spent her entire life in the shadow of her family suddenly refuses to be convenient? When she stops cleaning up after other people's children and says no for the first time? What happened next turned their home upside down in the most unexpected way. Clara held a jar of peach jam in her hands. The sticky lid wouldn't budge, as if reflecting the atmosphere in the house. On the surface, everything seemed simple and family-oriented, but inside, everything was stuck together, boiling like sugar on an old stove. She opened the jar not so much for the taste. Her mother loved to spread jam on toast, and they had run out of bread yesterday. As for the small ritual of caring, without words, without thanks, the kitchen smelled of burnt dust. The heater had been turned on in the morning. The walls were the color of diluted milk, and curtains with faded poppies hung at the window. Clara stood on tiptoe, took a spoon from the top drawer, and handed the bowl to the edge of the table. "Eat. It'll cool down." Her mother sat in a plaid robe, looking past her, as if Clara were some kind of kitchen cabinet. Convenient, necessary, but not alive. She pretended not to notice. She was used to it. The spoon clinked against the edge of the cup, the sound echoing in her chest like something metallic. "Not very thick," her mother muttered. "Did you water down the jam?" Clara didn't answer. She just sat down opposite her and wiped her hands on an old kitchen towel. She wanted to say that the jar had been in the cupboard for 3 years, that the jam had been made by her sister, the one her mother adored. But she kept quiet, because she knew they wouldn't hear her anyway. The sound of the TV came from the next room. There, in the armchair, leaning back like an emperor in exile, sat her father. He never interfered. He was there, and at the same time he wasn't, silent, resentful of the whole world. Talking to him was like arguing with the wind. He seemed to be there, but it was pointless. Clara leaned forward, picked up the ashtray, and dropped the cigarette butt she had forgotten there the night before. The cigarettes were her mother's. She had lung problems, but she had no intention of quitting. According to her, there was nothing left to live for anyway. Then why force others to live? "Did you wash my socks?" her mother asked suddenly, without looking up. Clara clenched her teeth. Of course she had. And she had changed the bedsheets, and given her medicine, and gone to buy bread. But no one asked about that. It was taken for granted. "Yes," she said quietly. "At least you're good for something," her mother sighed. "Otherwise, you just walk around like a shadow." Shadow. The word hurt. Not because it was harsh. Harshness had long been the norm here, but because it was accurate. She hadn't felt alive in a long time. She just moved, did things, existed, as if she were waiting for someone to finally notice she was there. Clara stood up, went to the window, and pulled back the curtains. A fine gray rain was falling outside. The garden looked neglected. The branches bent under the weight of the moisture. The grass was blackened. Autumn was always long in this house, as if it lingered, like a mother after a drag on a cigarette. "What are you staring at?" came a voice from behind her. "Daydreaming again?" Clara didn't answer. She just stood there. Her hand rested on the windowsill, the coolness of the glass penetrating her skin. "If you spent less time with your head in the clouds, maybe you'd get married like your sister," her mother continued, "instead of sitting here with the magpies on the stove." Clara turned slowly. Her mother fiddled with the jam, not noticing that she had touched it too hard. Or maybe she did notice, and did it on purpose. Her father stirred in his seat, but didn't look up from the TV. "I didn't ask you to save me," her mother said suddenly, sharply. "You came back on your own. Now deal with it." Clara felt something tighten inside her. It wasn't the words, it was the tone, the ease and coldness with which they were spoken, as if she were a burden, a mistake, an unwelcome guest in her own home. She opened the door to the porch and stepped outside. The rain immediately touched her cheeks. Not drops, but stings, cold as her mother at the table. She stood there, watching the water run down the edge of the roof, soaking the path. Only rain, and no one to say, "Let's go home." What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how Clara finally opened her mouth. Stay to see what a woman who has been silenced her entire life is capable of. Clara sat on the porch, holding a mug of cold tea in her hand. The steam had long since disappeared. So had the warmth of any words in this house. The wind tugged at the edge of her robe, and although the rain had slowed, it still dripped from the eaves, tapping nervously, rhythmically, like a reproach repeated too many times. Her mother coughed again inside the house. Her father muttered something over the sound of the television. Clara could hear it even through the glass. This house wasn't just old. It was full of sounds that couldn't be turned off. Even if you closed the door, it would still buzz in your head. "You were never like this." "Are you crooked again?" came a voice from behind her. Her neighbor, Magdalena, had come out onto the porch. She was in her 70s, but she had a sharp tongue and eyes that noticed everything. She was the kind of person who would pop in for a minute and stay for an hour. Clara didn't even notice how quickly you could talk to her about nothing in particular and still feel like someone had heard you. "Yeah, the rain is beautiful," Clara replied. "It's beautiful when you look at it from the window with a blanket and a book. Not when you're sitting there like a stray dog," Magdalena snorted. "Look at you. You're freezing, and you're not leaving." Clara smiled slightly. There was some truth in that. She really didn't want to go back inside. The house was warm, but it made her shiver. "Listen," Magdalena continued, sitting down next to her. "Can I tell you how I feel? Don't be offended." Clara nodded. Usually when someone asks you not to be offended, it's followed by a blow. "You're a good person, Clara, but you've spent your whole life putting yourself last, and they walk all over you. They don't even look at you." Clara was silent, not because she didn't know what to say. It was because she knew too much. "Don't you have any pride?" Magdalena added. "You live your life in the shadows." As if you're apologizing for something every day. For what? Clara lowered her gaze. Her eyes fell on the hem of her dress. A thin thread was sticking out of the seam. She pulled it, and it stretched even more. And that was her. "And your sister?" "Yes, she's loud and bright. But does that make her better? Just because your mother decided so?" Clara didn't answer, but something inside her stirred. It was like a long-forgotten window creaking, not opening yet, but wanting to. "You know," Magdalena added, standing up, "you've always been too soft. That's why people walk all over you." Clara nodded. It was as if she had heard it many times before. Only this time there was no venom, no condemnation, just a statement of fact. When her neighbor left, Clara sat on the porch for a long time. The floorboards creaked beneath her, the same ones her father had promised to fix last fall. But he never got around to it. Like so many other things. She took a handkerchief out of her pocket and wiped her hands. For some reason, her hands. It was as if everything she had held in her life, too many other people's worries, tears, reproaches, had left a stain on them that could not be washed away. The same phrase echoed in her head. "You're soft. That's why they walk all over you." She tried to remember who else had said that. Maybe her teacher in elementary school. Maybe her ex. Maybe herself. Who could tell now? Clara stood up and took a few steps across the wet porch. Under her feet was a nail sticking out at an angle. Symbolic, like so much else here. Sharp, forgotten, but capable of hurting at any moment. Her fingers clenched into a fist. Not for long. Then they relaxed. After all, A fist is a sign of strength. She was more used to open palms. For a tray, ironing, a first aid kit, a bowl of soup, so that everything would be fine, at least for others. This is the climax. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. We've reached the edge. What happens next will reveal the pain Clara has carried all her life. You have to see what she does now. The morning began the same way. The creaking of the bed, her mother's cough, her father's muffled muttering from behind the wall. Clara got up without an alarm clock. Her back told her when it was time. Her body knew the rhythm of this house better than a clock. The kitchen was cool. The windows sweated even in summer. The damp frames, from which the gaskets had long since fallen out, breathed moisture. Clara lit the stove, put the kettle on, and took out her pills. 3 in the morning, 4 in the evening. Her mother got confused with the dosage, but didn't like to argue. She swallowed them without looking. "Did you boil the eggs?" came a voice from the room. Clara didn't answer. She just nodded, although no one could see her. She nodded often, in response to the emptiness. It was easier that way. Her sister, Eva, rarely called. But when she did, her voice sounded triumphant. "Everything's fine." She never asked, "How are you?" Clara didn't expect her to. No one expected questions from Eva. They expected results. And her mother always emphasized this. Eva has children, a husband, her own home, and you're stuck at the stove. "So what?" she would say. Clara once asked why it had to be this way. Why compare when everyone has chosen their own path? To which her mother replied, "Because I want to be proud of at least someone." After that conversation, Clara stopped asking. Pride was not her currency. In the evenings, her father drank tea in the dark. He liked to sit in the kitchen with the lights off. He said that the lamps tired his eyes. Clara knew that he just didn't want to look. Not at his wife, not at his daughter. He was silent, like a monument in a park whose inscription had long since been erased. She and her mother hardly spoke in his presence. In that house, even resentments had a code of silence. When her father was around, everyone behaved more quietly, not because they were afraid, because they knew that neither sympathy nor intervention would be forthcoming. He was like an old electrical outlet. It looked like it was in the wall, but there was no power. Clara worked part-time as a seamstress. Sometimes people brought her pants to be hemmed or dresses to be shortened. Orders were few and far between, and the pay was low. But she didn't complain. At least it was hers. At least it was something where her opinion mattered. At least it was a centimeter of fabric that obeyed her hands. Among her customers was a woman named Señora Pilar, a gaunt widow in her 80s. She would come with bundles of clothes, bring apples, and talk business. But one day she stayed longer. She looked at Clara, long and thoughtfully, and said, "You have kind hands, and your eyes are like those of someone who has forgotten that they can be closed." Clara didn't answer then. She just adjusted her glasses and continued sewing, but she remembered that phrase, because there was no pity in it, only observation. Clara kept a box in her room. Not a chest, not a safe, just a cardboard box from an old vacuum cleaner. It contained letters, scraps of photographs, notes, children's cards, everything that didn't fit in this house. Her father called it junk. Her mother called it dust collectors. But for Clara, it was the life she had once lived. Before she came home to help, her return was not discussed. Her mother was hospitalized. Eva couldn't leave the children, and her father was at a loss. Clara arrived and stayed, first for a week, then for a month, then for a year. She thought they would at least say, "Thank you." But instead she heard, "Well, you finally came to your senses." Clara cooked, cleaned, did laundry. and held her mother's arm when she was unsteady from her medication. She made compresses. She signed prescriptions. All of this was taken for granted. And every time she heard, "You're in no hurry, are you?" something inside her tightened, because she really had nowhere to hurry to. No one was waiting for her. She made lentil soup for dinner. Her mother said it tasted bad. Her father said nothing. He just picked at the edge of his plate with his bread. "You could at least comb your hair," her mother said. "Why?" "Well, you're a woman." Clara got up, gathered the dishes, and took them to the kitchen. She would wash up later. They had a ritual. First discontent, then silence, then the hum of the TV. She went out into the yard. She sat down on a bench by the shed. The air smelled of wet earth. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. In her pocket was the same handkerchief she had used to wipe her hands that morning. Everything was repeating itself. Day after day. She took a small notebook out of her bag. It was empty. Not a single line. She wanted to start writing. Anything. Anything at all. But the words wouldn't come. It was as if the language she could use to speak honestly had long been replaced by the daily, "Uh-huh, I understand, and everything's fine." The bench was cold, but Clara didn't get up. She sat there as if she were being punished. She didn't know for what. Or maybe she did, but didn't want to admit it, for waiting her whole life for someone to approve of her existence. The rain started again in the early morning. It wasn't heavy, but it was persistent, like everything else in this house. The sound of raindrops on the windowsill woke her before any other noise. Clara got up, put her jacket over her pajamas, and walked barefoot down the hallway. The rug by the door was damp, either from water dripping from the roof or a draft bringing moisture in from the street. Her mother was already sitting in the kitchen. A cup of half-drunk tea steamed against her silent face. A bag stood by the wall. It was new, hard, square, with an inscription that Clara didn't recognize. "Did someone come to see you?" she asked, nodding toward the bag. Her mother just grunted. Then she nodded toward the window. "Ava is coming." Clara froze. It was as if someone had poured a bucket of water over her. "When?" "In an hour, maybe less. She's with the kids. She said her husband couldn't make it, but they'd be fine." Clara put the kettle on and turned away toward the sink. Her stomach felt empty. Not from fear, but from the familiar feeling of a game she knew she had already lost. For long? I don't know. But if they've come, it's not just for the day. She nodded mechanically. The water from the tap was ice cold, but her hands weren't shaking. She knew how to behave around Ava. Quiet. Careful. So as not to irritate her. 40 minutes later, the car pulled up outside. There was a knock at the door, a child's voice, squeals, footsteps. Her mother smiled in a way Clara hadn't seen in a long time. Her lips trembled with tenderness, her eyes filled with light. Not the light she showed everyone else. The light she reserved only for those she loved. Ava entered like the mistress of the house. She started right away. "Mom, how are you? What's this mess? Why don't you move in with me already?" Clara stood to one side, like a guest, like a piece of furniture. "Hi," she said, but Ava had already turned to the children. A girl of about 7 slipped past and put a doll on the table. A younger boy reached for a piece of candy, and his mother, their grandmother, pushed a bowl toward him as if he were a king. Ava looked Clara up and down. "Are you still here?" Clara nodded silently. She smiled stiffly, almost apologetically. Ava took off her coat and hung it over someone else's, as she always did. "I thought you were leaving," she said. "Mom, it'll be easier for you if I take care of everything." Clara watched her sister walk around the kitchen as if she owned the place. Her bag was on the table, and children's clothes were scattered across the chairs. Her father came out of the room, muttered a greeting, and disappeared again. "I'm just helping out," Clara said quietly. While I'm alive?" Eva interrupted. "Thanks for your indulgence." Her mother looked up. "Girls, don't fight." "We're not fighting," Eva replied. "Just setting priorities." "I brought the children. I need the space. By the way, Clara, maybe you could sleep in the shed for now." Clara exhaled through her nose. No tears, no cries. Just a short, tight lump inside, as if someone had reminded her again where she belonged, and she had agreed. "Of course," she said. "I'll bring you a pillow." Eva smiled, as if that was the way it should be. Her mother nodded silently, as if in agreement. Clara went out into the yard. The shed smelled of mice and damp wood. Once upon a time, it had been used to store jars of jam, then tools, then old bedspreads. Now it was just junk. But it was a space without voices. She lifted the edge of the blanket, shook off the cobwebs, and laid down the pillow. An old calendar with torn pages hung on the wall. The face on it was indistinguishable, like a symbol of a past that had faded away. Clara sat down on a box. She hugged her knees. Laughter came from the street. Children's laughter. Cheerful, it cut her off from life, like a ribbon at the entrance. Not for you. And suddenly, the rain intensified again. It splashed on her through the open crack in the door. She stood up, closed it, but it was too late. Her shoulder was wet. She didn't feel cold. Only inside. It had been there for a long time. Clara looked out the window. Gray drops ran down the glass like foreign hands pushing her out of the house. She didn't know how long she sat there. At some point, the door opened again. But that will be in the next chapter. Clara sat on a box in the shed, her arms wrapped around her shoulders. The smell of rot, wet wood, and mold hit her nose. Familiar, like the taste of her own resentment. Outside the door, rain, laughter, voices. The house lived its own life, and that life, as it turned out, was perfectly fine without her. The shed was uncomfortable. The roof was leaking in one corner. The floor was uneven, and the walls were like cardboard. She could hear every word from the house, especially the ones she didn't want to hear. "She just stayed because she had nowhere else to go," Eva said. "But that doesn't mean that everything is hers now." "She does a lot," her mother added quietly. "Yes, but she does it because she has no life of her own, Mom. What about you? Are you grateful? Or is it just more convenient to have someone around?" Clara stood up. Her hands were shaking, and not from the cold. She went to the door and opened it slightly. The voices grew louder, as if they had been turned up to full volume in her head. "I don't want to argue," Eva continued, "but let's be honest. We're adults. You're my mother. I want you to be with me, with your grandchildren. And Clara, well, she's always been special." The word special sounded as if she were a faulty light bulb. Clara slammed the door shut and sat back down. Her heart was beating erratically. She wanted to break something, to scream, or at least cry. But nothing came out. Only inside, it quietly built up. So I'm just left behind. So I'm not family, just a function. She remembered how she used to draw houses at home when she was a child. Big ones, with chimneys and windows. And inside were her mother, father, sister, and her. They were all holding hands. They were all smiling. Then her mother tore up the drawing. "Nonsense again. You'd better do your homework." Her father just waved it away. Girls and their fantasies. Clara exhaled, deeply, almost wearily. How many years had she put up with this? How many times had she thought, "It's all nonsense. Things will work out." But nothing worked out. It only sank deeper into her bones. In the evening, she returned home. Ava was combing her daughter's hair in front of the mirror. Her mother was lying on the sofa with her eyes closed. Her father was back in his chair with the newspaper. Everyone looked calm, as if there had been no conversation behind her back. Clara went into the kitchen and started clearing the dirty dishes. Her mother opened her eyes. "You didn't finish cooking the soup," she said. "The lentils are hard." Clara nodded. She didn't argue anymore. "I can make another one," Eva replied, entering the room. "Or can Clara take care of it?" "Of course she can," her mother muttered. "That's what she's here for." Clara stopped. The spoon in her hand was shaking. She looked at them and felt something rising inside her. It wasn't anger. It wasn't resentment. It was as if there was a voice inside her, behind all the turmoil. It was faint, but persistent. "You know," she said calmly, "I don't have to do this." Eva turned around. "What?" "All of this. The house, the cooking, the medicine. I don't have to do this. I didn't sign a contract with you." Her mother sat down. There was no fear or shame in her eyes, more like surprise, as if a dusty statue had suddenly started talking. "Who else, if not you?" "Exactly," said Clara. "All my life it's been, who else, if not you? Have you ever asked me if I want to do this?" The silence was deafening. Even Eva, usually so lively, froze. "Clara," she said, "don't go too far." "I'm not going too far. I'm just saying it for the first time." She put the spoon in the sink. Her back was straight. Her hands were no longer shaking. "I'm not asking for gratitude. I don't need it anymore. But at least, don't wipe your feet on me." And she left. She didn't slam the door. She just walked away, into the barn. It was damp there, but honest. The next morning, Clara woke up before everyone else. It was damp and dark in the shed, and a draft was blowing under the blanket, but she wasn't shivering. On the contrary, it was quiet inside, almost like after a fire. Everything had burned down, and now there was only ash. No pain, no fear, just emptiness. She got up, pulled her coat on over her pajamas, went into the house, filled a basin with water, and silently returned to the barn. She washed herself from the basin, like she did as a child at the dacha. She looked in the mirror, hanging on a nail. Her face was tired, with bruises under her eyes. Her hair was tousled. But her gaze was steady, without the usual, "I'm sorry, I exist." The others woke up later. Ava slammed the closet door loudly, and the children ran down the hall. Her mother coughed. Everything was as usual, only Clara didn't show up in the kitchen. She hadn't made breakfast. She hadn't sliced the bread. She hadn't made tea. Ava went into the kitchen, fiddled with the stove, then called out, "Clara, where are you?" "In the shed," she replied calmly. "Are you coming out? Or are we having a buffet now?" Clara threw on a jacket, went out into the yard, and stopped at the kitchen door. "Cook it yourself. I'm not a housekeeper anymore." Ava fell silent. Then she snorted. "You must be going through a crisis." "No, I've just had enough." Her mother appeared in the doorway. "Another scene? Of course. You've always loved drama." "No, Mom. I'm just tired of living in the shadow of your pride in Eva." Ava snorted. "You could have achieved something too, but you chose to live in self-pity." Clara nodded. "Maybe. But you know what hurts the most? That I tried so hard for you, all this time, and you didn't notice, or didn't want to." Eva moved closer. "Then leave. If it's so hard, leave." "Who's keeping you here?" Clara looked at her calmly. "You are, all of you. Every time you said, 'You're in no hurry.' Or, 'She doesn't have anyone anyway.' Or, 'It's good that you're here. It's so convenient for us. You didn't ask for help. You just used me so you wouldn't have to face reality yourselves." Her mother sat down on a chair. Ava stood with her arms crossed. Her father, as usual, didn't intervene. He just glanced from behind his newspaper, as if none of this concerned him. Clara turned and went back to the barn. In the afternoon, the neighbor, Senora Magdalena, came by. She brought a pie and knocked on the barn door. I heard. "Are you guys fighting?" Clara nodded. "You know," Magdalena said, sitting down next to her, "they won't change. You could bake golden pies, and they'd still say they're burnt." "I know." "Then why are you still here?" Clara looked out the window. "Because I'm afraid that I'll leave and find out that without them, I'm nobody too." Magdalena covered her hand with hers. "Try it. Become someone not because of them, but in spite of them." Clara nodded, slowly, but with a different feeling inside. Not with resignation, but with determination. That evening, she sat down to write in her notebook. The first word came out crooked, as if it belonged to someone else. But it was there. And then came the second, the third, then a line, another one, a page. She didn't know where it would lead. But for the first time in a long time, she was doing something without asking permission. And the feeling wasn't joy or excitement, but simply a strength inside. It was as if something inside her had finally fallen into place. Saturday was cloudy but dry. The air was thick like a blanket, not cold, but heavy to breathe. Clara sat by the shed with her notebook on her knees. She wrote, crossed things out, wrote again. Her hand shook a little, from excitement, from not being used to doing something for herself. From a distance, she heard the sound of a stroller on gravel. Someone was approaching. She looked up and saw Matteo, her neighbor's son, walking down the path. He was a quiet, thin guy in his early 20s, always wearing headphones, and carrying a book under his arm. But this time, he had no headphones, just a basket and a bag. "Good afternoon, Senora Clara," he said, a little awkwardly. "My mom asked me to give you these, apples and rolls. And, did you ask for this?" He pulled out a thin notebook with a cloth cover. Clara blinked. "Me? Did I ask for this?" Matteo blushed a little. "No, you just said something. That you used to write, but now you can't find any decent paper. Well, I thought." She took the notebook and ran her hand over the cover. "Thank you. You're welcome. To be honest, I sometimes read what you wrote on the school board when we were asked to write essays. I used to think, I wish I could do that." Clara smiled. It was her first real smile in several days. It was nonsense. Yeah, such nonsense that I remember the story about the woman who lost her voice but continued to sing inside. She looked at him in surprise. Matteo lowered his eyes. "It's just, if you ever decide to write again, I'd like to read it." He nodded, turned around, and left. No drama, no expectations. He left behind a quiet gratitude and a new emptiness that didn't weigh him down, but called to be filled with something real. Clara opened her notebook. The pages were white, slightly rough, the kind of paper you wouldn't be ashamed to write your innermost thoughts on. In the evening, she went into the house. There were screams coming from the kitchen again. "I don't understand why she's upset," Eva was saying. "She's always getting upset, sulking, then acting like she's some kind of heroine." "You're the heroine," her mother replied. "She's just Clara." "She's always been strange." Clara stood in the doorway. "Do you really think I'm offended?" she asked. They fell silent. "I'm not offended. I'm just not participating anymore." "In what?" Eva asked irritably. "In this play, where I'm just background, where my yes is considered normal and my no is considered rebellion. I'm not a shadow. I'm a person. And to your surprise, I have a reader." Her mother glanced at her. "Who?" Clara smiled. "Matteo." Eva snorted. "The shy one?" "No," Clara replied calmly. "He's polite and attentive, and he's the only one who said I write beautifully. Not, why do you bother? Do something useful." Silence hung in the room like a thick web. Clara walked over to the table and put down the buns. "I'm not trying to convince you of anything. It's just that now I have a different mirror. And in it, I'm not a nobody." She went into the shed, leaving them with their silence. That night, she wrote the first chapter of a story. Not about herself, but about a woman who had lived for 40 years in a house full of echoes, and suddenly realized that the echoes were her own voice, distorted by foreign walls. The next week, Clara woke up not to the alarm clock of pain, but to the sound of her own breathing. Quiet, even. Not with the anxious, "I have to get up," but with a simple, "I can." She still lived in a shed, but it didn't bother her. On the contrary, there were no voices, no stares, no comments. Only the morning light, a box of papers, and her notebook, which was gradually filling up with lines. Clara didn't stage revolutions. She didn't make scenes. She didn't scream. She didn't break doors. She just started saying no. And that word, so short, echoed in every corner of the house. When Eva came into the kitchen again and said, "We need to mop the floors. The kids have trampled everything," Clara replied without looking up. "You mop them." Eva flinched as if she had been slapped. "What?" "You mop them. Your children are your footprints." And she went back to cutting apples. Without malice, without pressure, just calmly. And Eva recoiled from this calmness as if from boiling water. Her mother tried to restore order. She grumbled that Clara was ungrateful, just like her grandfather. Likes to ruin everything. But her words seemed to fall on a new surface. They no longer had any effect on Clara. Not because she had become strong. It was because she was tired of being weak. Her father was silent, and for the first time, his silence did not seem like an accusation to her. Rather, it was a silent admission. He knew that everything was falling apart, but he didn't have the tools to fix it. One evening, Clara saw him look into the shed. He just stood at the door. He didn't say anything. Then he left, but he no longer looked at her with his usual irritation. It was as if he understood. Now she was no longer part of the furniture. Now she was the one who had left the room without slamming the door. Matteo would drop by in the evenings. He brought apples, and once he brought a book of poetry. Sometimes he just sat silently while Clara wrote. He was surprisingly unobtrusive. No romance, no intrusiveness, just presence. Calm, accepting. "Are you angry with them?" he asked once, when they were sitting next to each other on an old bench. Clara shrugged. "Not anymore. I used to be. Very much so. But now, I just want them to let me be myself." "And who are you?" She thought about it for a long time. Then she replied, "Definitely not what they think I am." She started going out into the city, for fabric, for paper, for coffee. Once she even went to an exhibition of local artists, where she would never have set foot before. Not my thing. Silly. No time. She stood in front of a painting of a woman with her eyes closed and her palms open, and recognized herself, not outwardly, inside. Because for the first time she understood that being open is not a weakness, it is honesty. Senora Magdalena helped her find clients. Clara began to sew to order, not just hemming pants, but real clothes, blouses, skirts, even children's dresses. She pulled out an old sewing machine, wiped off the dust, and oiled it. A table appeared in the shed, with chalk, pins, and patterns on it. This place was no longer a storage room. It became hers. Her mother came in a couple of times. She looked from the doorway. She didn't say anything. Once she just said, "Well, since you're sewing, I'd like a new robe." Clara didn't answer, and she didn't sew it. Eva stayed home with the children more and more often. They were noisy, running around, dirtying the floor. Clara no longer washed up the marks. Once a boy ran into the shed and said, "Why aren't you with us?" She smiled. "Because now I'm with myself." Something like respect flashed in the boy's eyes. Or maybe it was just curiosity. He sat down on the floor and watched her cut the fabric. Then he said, "It's like another world in here." "This is another world," Clara replied, "where I can be heard." Clara didn't change. She still made tea for her mother when she asked. She still held the door when her father left. She still listened to Eva's conversations when she started whining about life. But now it was by choice, not out of duty, not by default. She no longer tried to earn love. She simply stopped giving hers away. The day began as usual. Dampness in the air, her mother's voice from the room, the sound of little feet in the hallway. Clara woke up early, brewed some herbal tea in a tin mug, and sat down in the barn by the window, watching the raindrops run down the glass. She felt an unfamiliar lightness in her body, as if something heavy had finally fallen away. Not completely, but enough to breathe without effort. There was a knock on the barn door. One short, polite knock. "Clara!" It was Eva, without her usual urgency, without irritation in her voice. "Can I come in?" Clara nodded. Eva entered, holding an old photo album in her hands, the one that was usually kept on the top shelf of the wardrobe, under a blanket and covered in dust. "I found this when I was looking for my son's socks. I opened it at random." She placed the album on the table. "There's a photo of you when you were about 8. You're smiling, as if you believe that anything is possible." Clara was silent. She knew that photo. She knew how hard it had been to get her mother to take it, only after much persuasion and a promise of candy. And the smile. Back then, she had hoped that if she tried hard enough, she would be loved too. Eva continued, "I wanted to say that. I've always envied you." Clara looked up. For the first time in a long time, she looked straight ahead, without fear. "What? You never cared what anyone thought. You withdrew into yourself, into books, into sewing. I was always trying to be convenient, to be first, needed. And you succeeded," Clara said calmly. "No, I just got tired. Being mom's pride and joy all the time isn't a status, it's a sentence." They fell silent. Between them stood the album, a testament to a shared past in which each had been lonely in her own way. Eva sighed and stood up. "I don't know how to deal with you, but thank you for not sending me away when I behaved like a—" "Like what?" Clara prompted. "It's okay." Eva left. Clara remained with the album. She flipped through the pages as if touching scars. There she was at her graduation, wearing a dress she had sewn herself. There was her birthday, with an empty plate in front of her, because she had forgotten to take a piece of cake. And then there was none left. There was her mother with Eva, and somewhere in the corner, as if by accident, was Clara's shoulder. Not even her face, just her shoulder. Like in real life, to be, but not to be. She closed the album and put it away. Her eyes stung, not from sadness, from the truth. In the evening, Senora Magdalena returned. She brought a pear pie and some news. "Today at the market, a woman asked who sews collars like the ones you wear." I gave her your name. Clara blushed. "I'm not ready yet. It's just a shed, and I'm not. You're not a workshop. You're Clara, and that's enough." Late in the evening, when the voices in the house had died down, Clara went out onto the porch. She sat down on the steps and looked up at the sky. The clouds were thick and dense, but suddenly, a star appeared between them. One, small but bright. Not a symbol, not a sign. Just a reminder that not everything was covered in darkness. At that moment, she heard footsteps behind her. It was her father. He was standing a little to the side, in the shadows. "Are you comfortable in the barn?" Clara didn't turn around. Much more comfortable than under the gaze of strangers. He was silent. Then he said quietly, "I probably didn't do anything right. Not as a husband, not as a father. But I watched how you held yourself together. You are strong. And I'm weak. And I'm ashamed." Clara wanted to respond, but she couldn't. A lump formed in her throat, not from pain, but from hearing something she had never heard from him before. She nodded. Just nodded. He left. She stayed. For the first time, she didn't feel cut off or like a stranger. She just felt like herself. The morning began with loud voices in the house. Clara could hear them from the barn. Sounds, words, familiar intonations. Her mother was complaining again, but now it wasn't about Clara. Now it was about Eva, about how noisy her grandchildren were, how the soup was too salty, how no one cared properly. Clara smiled, almost without malice. She simply noted that the system had begun to devour its new guardians. She wiped her hands on the thread, closed the button box, and walked to the porch when the door flew open and Eva rushed out. Her face was red, her hands were shaking. "You knew, didn't you?" she snapped. Clara blinked. What? That it's impossible with her, that she's always dissatisfied, that everything you do is not enough. You knew, and you kept quiet. And I, like an idiot, drove the kids around and rearranged my schedule. And nothing is ever right for her. The tea isn't right. The kids are in the way. And I'm not you. Clara nodded. Yes, I knew. Eva bit her lip. Her eyes were filled with resentment. Deep, old, like the mark left by a ring on a finger that had been removed many years ago. You could have told me, warned me, protected me. Clara took a slow breath. I didn't think you'd believe me. You always said I was touchy, that I made everything up. Eva took a step back. So now you're enjoying this? Watching me drown in the place where you drowned? Clara shook her head. No, I'm just tired of pulling you out. She went back into the shed. Eva remained standing in the yard, alone, with her bag slung over her shoulder, as if she had just realized that Clara wasn't going to save her. In the evening, her mother came into the shed. She didn't knock. She just walked in and sat down. Well, what did you accomplish? She asked. Clara didn't turn around. She kept working with the fabric. My place. Eva is crying. She's hurt. The children are scared. You're destroying the family. Clara put down the fabric. I didn't destroy anything. I just quit the game. Family isn't a game, Clara. What is it then? A duty? A prison? Her mother looked at her intently. You've always been different, sensitive, too soft, too slow. You took everything to heart. You wanted to be loved too much. Clara nodded. I did. Now I just want you not to despise me. Her mother stood up. Her face was drawn and gray. You'll regret it when I die. Clara clenched her fists, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. Maybe, but not because I didn't do everything for you. It's because I never heard a single simple word. You're doing great. Her mother left, slamming the door behind her. A draft lifted a piece of fabric. Clara sank into a chair and ran her hand over her face. It seemed as if everything she had built inside herself was now swaying, like a house of cards that had been blown from both sides. Matteo came in later. He brought paper and a pear. He sat down by the wall. "You look like you've been in a fight." Clara smiled. "The battle continues. Only the battlefield is inside. You're not alone." She looked at him. He wasn't smiling. He just sat there. It was better than any words. "I'm afraid it'll all fall apart," Clara said quietly. "That I'll give up again. I'll get tired. That I'll become convenient again." Matteo handed her a sheet of paper. "If you give up, write about it. Write how it feels. Then read it again. And decide if you want to go back there." She took the sheet and looked at it. It was blank, but it seemed full. Full of the possibility of remaining herself. Clara woke up with a pain in her back. The damp air, the old pillow, the fatigue that had accumulated over months. The day was dull and low, like the autumn sky before a storm. She sat by the window for a long time, unable to pick up her notebook. Her hands fell to her knees, her fingers sliding listlessly over the fabric of her skirt. Inside, there was a feeling of emptiness that wasn't frightening. It was exhausting. The house was too quiet. Even Eva's children weren't making any noise. Something hung in the air, tense, oppressive. Clara went outside and approached the porch where her father was smoking. "Is everything okay?" she asked. He looked at her, coughed, and tilted his head back. "Your mother is in the hospital. They took her this morning." Clara froze. "Why didn't anyone call?" "Eva went with her. She said you were the one who was with her the most." He said it calmly, without blame, without excuse, just as a fact, as if the last thread holding her in this house had been cut. She went inside. The rooms were empty, like a stage set after a performance. On the table was a cup with some tea left in it, next to her mother's woolen scarf. The familiar smell of eucalyptus and old pills hung in the air, as if her mother were still there. Clara picked up the cup. Her hands trembled. Tea splashed onto her palm. It was hot, but she didn't pull her hand away. The pain was necessary. It told her she was alive. Eva returned in the evening. Her eyes were tear-stained, her coat was stained, and there were dark circles under her eyes. The children had stayed with a friend. "She's in serious condition," she said. "Heart attack. The doctors don't know if she'll recover." Clara was silent. She listened as if through glass. "And could you be with us? There? At least sometimes?" Clara looked at her. "Who am I to you?" Eva didn't answer. Clara got up and went to her room. Not the shed, but the one that had been hers before Eva returned. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She looked in the mirror. Her eyes were tired, without any sparkle. Her hair was tied back. Her face was normal. Only in the corners of her lips was there a weariness that hadn't been there before. On the table was a notebook, gray with a bent corner. Clara opened it. The blank page stared at her reproachfully. "You wanted to write," something whispered inside her. But she closed the notebook. She couldn't do it. Everything that seemed like the beginning of a new life suddenly collapsed. She was back in the house, surrounded by voices, surrounded by other people's expectations. And this time, she was defenseless, because even the strength she had begun to build up inside her couldn't withstand the pressure of the old scenario. Matteo hadn't come for 3 days. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he sensed that Clara had distanced herself again. Signora Magdalena had left to visit her daughter for a week, and only silence remained. Clara returned to the shed. She sat down on the floor and hugged her knees. Suddenly, she felt cold, not from the wind, from inside. On her knees was that very photograph of her at the age of 8. Her smile was uncertain, her eyes averted. She had always been afraid to look at the camera. It was as if she knew that later, people would look at the photo and search for the moment when she had turned away. She took a pair of scissors and cut the photo in half, not out of malice, simply because she could no longer bear to look at this girl who believed she deserved love. The lights went out. Night fell. Clara sat in the darkness of the barn, wrapped in an old blanket. Silence enveloped her like a thick fog, but inside, a storm of thoughts and feelings raged. Scenes from her childhood floated into her mind, faint, as if covered with a layer of dust, but with pain that was clear and vivid. She remembered how Ava held her hand in the schoolyard, not out of concern, but so that no one would think Clara was alone. She remembered how her mother scolded her for writing slowly, for her clumsy drawings, for her voice that was too quiet, how her father looked at them as if he didn't notice, and then went into the garage. That garage, where he kept his old tools and his unfulfilled dreams. "You're too soft," her neighbor Magdalena's words echoed in her head, but now they had a different meaning. Not a reproach, but a warning. Maybe softness wasn't a weakness. Maybe she wasn't the one who broke first, but the one who allowed herself to be herself, no matter what. She thought about those nights when she cried quietly so no one would hear her, about her endless attempts to please, to make herself noticed, about how every "you're not like that" dug into her heart like a splinter that no one wanted to remove. Clara asked herself the question she was afraid to hear. What have I become? The answer didn't come right away. It was deeper than simple understanding. I became a shadow. I was a shadow. I lost myself to be needed. But I don't live in the shadows. Her voice trembled, but her words were firm. A quiet but unshakable feeling arose inside her. Not hope, but determination. She remembered her grandmother's voice, which she hadn't heard in a long time. Warm, wise, full of love, memories of hugs, of how she was told as a child, "You are special. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Quietly, as if to herself, Clara said, "I want to live for myself, not for those who can't hear me, not for those who don't love me, but for myself." Her eyes filled with tears, but not tears of pity. These were tears of liberation, of saying goodbye to the past. She took out a notebook and opened a blank page. Her hand was no longer shaking. Word by word, line by line, she began to write. Not for anyone else, but for herself. For the first time in many years, a sound came out of her mouth. The sound of her own voice. Clara woke up feeling that the night had taken away not only the darkness, but also the burden that had been weighing her down for so many years. She looked in the mirror. Her eyes were clear despite her fatigue, and in the depths of her reflection she saw something new. Not fear or pain, but a quiet confidence. She got up, got dressed, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't go to the barn, but headed straight for the house. The kitchen greeted her with the smells of yesterday's dinner and midday dampness. Ava and her mother were sitting at the table discussing their plans for the day, as if Clara were not part of their world. "I want to talk," Clara said calmly. Both women turned to her, slightly surprised. "I need to say something I've wanted to say for a long time. And you're going to listen to me." "What kind of statement is that?" her mother croaked. "It's simple," Clara replied. "I don't want to be silent anymore. I want to be heard, not for the sake of arguments or drama, but for myself." Ava glanced at her mother, then back at her sister. "And what do you suggest?" she asked defiantly. Start with the truth. I'm not a shadow. I'm a person with the right to choose, to feel, to make mistakes. And I'm not going to live in the shadow of your expectations anymore." Her mother jumped up, her eyes burning. "You think it's that easy to break all ties? That family is just a word?" "No," said Clara. "Family is both words and actions. But if the words are cold and the actions are indifference, then it's not a family. It's a prison." Her father appeared in the doorway and said nothing. His gaze was heavy and tired, but not without sympathy. "We all make mistakes," he said finally. "But you are our daughter, and we have a lot to learn from you." Clara hadn't expected such words, but she felt the knot inside her loosen a little. It wasn't a victory, more of a beginning. A new path. She took a step forward. "I don't expect you to understand right now, but please give me space to live my life, to write, to work, to be myself. Nothing more, nothing less." Ava looked at her mother looked at her father, and silence hung in the air. But in that silence, for the first time, something like respect could be heard. Clara turned and left the kitchen. Behind the door, she took a deep breath. Now she knew for sure. The past was only part of the journey, not the end of it. She took her notebook and went to the shed, her place of strength, where words became actions. Evening fell slowly. Shadows stretched across the room, filling the corners with soft darkness. Clara stood by the kitchen window, holding a folded letter in her hands, the one she had been planning to write for a long time, but couldn't bring herself to do. She felt both heavy and light inside, as if thousands of words hidden for years had finally been given the right to come out. She heard footsteps behind her. Her mother entered, carrying a cup of tea. She placed it on the table and looked directly into Clara's eyes. "I read your letter," she said quietly. Clara nodded, not looking away. "There's a lot of pain in there, a lot of words I've never heard before. I just wanted you to know," Clara's voice trembled slightly, "that I'm not here to be wiped on, that I'm a person too, that I want to be loved too." Her mother came closer and sat down opposite her. For the first time in a long time, there was no accusation in her eyes. There was something else, fatigue and quiet pity. "I didn't know how to be with you. I didn't understand too much, but that doesn't mean I didn't love you." "Love isn't always kind words and hugs," Clara replied softly. "Sometimes it shows itself in letting go." There was a knock at the door. Her father entered, carrying the neighbor's younger dog, who had recently lost his home. "Maybe it's time for all of us to start over," he said quietly. Ava, standing in the doorway, nodded. "Yes, I've had to learn a lot, too." Clara smiled, not broadly, but sincerely. They all stood together, not without reproach, not without old wounds, but together. "I can't promise it will be easy," she said. "But I want to try, at least for myself." Her mother took her hand. "Me too." Ava approached and hugged her sister. Their father smiled, allowing himself to be close for the first time. The light from the lamp warmed the kitchen, reflecting in eyes that were no longer full of pain. There was hope. The silence was not one of resentment, but of promises. That love does not mean possession, but respect. Clara looked at the rain outside the window. Now it didn't seem cold and lonely. It was alive, just like her. Clara stood on the porch, wrapped in a gray woolen scarf. The rain was drizzling again, the same steady, persistent rain that had once seemed hopeless to her. But now the sound of raindrops on the roof was not oppressive. It was familiar, like the breath of the earth. She held an umbrella in her hands. It was an ordinary, old umbrella with a wooden handle, slightly bent on one side. She held it not for protection, just because. as a reminder that she had once stood in this same place and waited for someone to offer her a hand. Now she was waiting for no one. The house behind her was the same window frames, the same crooked porch, the same smell of wet wood. But inside it was quieter, not because the reproaches had fallen silent, but because she no longer had any expectations. Inside there was a notebook on the table. It already contained almost a dozen stories. Matteo still came by, not every day, without words about meaning or importance. He just brought apples, left a couple of pages from his books, and sometimes read what she had written in silence. And that was enough. Her mother now asked her how she was feeling instead of when dinner would be ready. It wasn't always warm, but it was sincere. Ava called. Not often, but not with complaints. She called out of interest. The sisters no longer tried to outdo each other. They just were. Close. Alive. Clara breathed in the cold air and turned up her collar. The clay squelched under her feet. And yet she walked on, confidently, slowly, without haste, without fear. She opened her umbrella and walked along the path leading to the garden. In the very place where she had once stood in the rain, her shoulders slumped, thinking that no one could see her. Now she could see herself. If you have ever felt like an outsider in your own family, write the word enough in the comments. Let us know that you also know what it's like to be heard too late.